There's going to be many times as an artist that you're going to feel like you stalled out, where progress just simply isn't happening. And oftentimes this particularly happens when you need other people's permission or input and such, right? So for example, if you're querying a book, let's say, right, you have to email it out to publishers and wait for their responses, and oftentimes, it's a rejection and so forth. Or if you're a filmmaker trying to get a studio on board, if you're like a painter, maybe it's getting a gallery to showcase your work, whatever it is, right? There's these outside factors that, unfortunately, for the most part, especially early on, we kind of need to depend on in order to be put on a platform, right? And there's an emotional stamina that's required because you're essentially waiting for the yeses. And that can be mentally debilitating. And it's like, okay, how do you make any sort of progress in that, right? So there's this idea of micro progress and, the small milestones and victories that you can sort of hang your hat on. Now, before I talk about, how you can really approach this, here's a bit of good news, right? Brené Brown, very famous author, she has talked about in the past that with her first book, she could fill an entire stadium worth of the rejection letters that she received when she was reaching out to publishers, right? So, imagine a football stadium. That's really, really big. So that's a lot of rejections. And you have similar stories about, let's say, Harry Potter and all kinds of things. Now, obviously, there's this version of it that, yes, those are the same people that tout, just keep going, are the ones that found success. There's, of course, the flip side of artists that did keep going and unfortunately never achieved that success. That's why part of the whole stamina is knowing that at the end of the day, you really have to make the art for yourself first and foremost. And, if you try to do it for other people in validation, you're really going to get caught with your pants down, as they say, and it's going to be a lot more difficult. But yeah, it is a very interesting fine line of how, do you keep continuing to pursue and have that stamina, because it does require stamina. Do you pivot and try something else? And part of, if you're waiting on those answers, is to find ways to keep going, whether it is with that same project or starting a new one, right? I'll give you an example. For me, I'm working on getting the full funding for The Arbiters, my animated feature film. And as I continue to work towards that goal, we're slowly but surely, working on the creative side and moving that. Now, it's not as fast-paced as it would be if we were in full production of the movie, but at a much slower pace. We're creating storyboards, concept art, and just keeping that side of it going, right? So what's a version of that? And again, it could either be with that same project or with starting a new project, right? While you're waiting on those answers. But there's various forms, to all this. When I talk about the emotional stamina, there's this aspect of it that it's almost like a mental battle of self-worth, right? If you're not getting responses, or the responses that you're getting are rejections, that can be difficult, right? Because we pour our hearts and our souls into our creative work, and to not have that be received by the outside world can be very frustrating, to say the least. And quite literally, like you're not being seen or heard, right? But that doesn't mean that it doesn't have merit, and that doesn't mean it's not worth pursuing. What's also, at least from my experience, kind of very difficult is there's these moments that you have a good interaction, let's say in person or via email or on a phone call, and they're excited by the prospect of what you're doing and stuff like that. They're like, yeah, email me, this and that. And then you don't hear back, which in and of itself becomes an answer, right? And so it's like, wait, I thought we had something going here. If you change your mind, at least let me know and stuff like that. So I say that because earlier I made mention of this idea that you have to hang your hat on micro progress. Well, it's also important to not get overzealous about certain things, right? Again, it's a very fine line. In fact, my friend Daryl, Kristen, and I talk about this all the time, that until something is fully signed and on the dotted line and so forth, it's never a done deal. And even then, Hollywood certainly has shown us that even then it's not necessarily, a given, let's say, right? But you do have to find and navigate your way through it. And sometimes it's just a numbers game, right? Other times it's like, okay, something isn't working. So how can you adapt without abandoning? How can you just make slight alterations and just test certain things out? And here's the crazy part. Give enough time in between certain things, and you might later on get a yes. Meaning if you reach out to a certain person and they say, it's not for us at this moment, it might be true that it's just in that moment. A year or two down the line, it might actually be for them. Because things change, especially in our world, and 2 years can be multiple lifetimes in terms of progress and stuff like that. So you never know. I mean, you have to be cautious with that stuff about reapproaching someone who already, let's say, said not for us at this moment. But if you attend various industry events and you bump into people and say, hey, how's it going? And this and that. And that's why I overall try to foster just a good relationship with anyone. That way, whenever I reach out to them or see them, especially at industry events, then you can have that friendly banter and you could reopen a closed case in some senses. But that's just one part of it. You could, of course, just reach out to new people and reconfigure how you do it. Think about, okay, I tried this, it didn't work. Maybe it wasn't, how can I alter it more? So I'm constantly kind of, for me, adapting in the various ways. Here's a tangible example. When we first started outreaching to people about our movie, we leaned into certain examples of why we felt that the project was worthwhile. And now, in the past just 6 months, the industry's kind of shifted, and there's articles from Variety about the strength of animation, both as a mainstream thing, but also with the success of Flow on the indie level and things of that nature. So, we can point to those as examples of why this is a worthwhile investment. And so there's just more tools in our arsenal, and we're seeing, even just based off of conversations and rejections, perhaps, and what piques people's interest, you can start to go towards that. You're essentially collecting data. Here's some prompts to perhaps help you to reignite your drive, because as I said, it can be debilitating to feel like you're stalled out for, days on end, weeks on end, months on end, and so forth. Number one, audit yourself. So, as I've been sort of highlighting just now, how are you approaching it? How can you revise it to make it more engaging, make it more striking? Maybe your approach in general, right? Where's the list of people that you can, that are best for you, right? So, initially, we did various Google searches and stuff like that. And then for us, we start to look at okay, where can we get this information? Okay, maybe LinkedIn, for filmmakers specifically, there's a platform called Sonando, IMDb Pro, like all these sorts of things. And you start to like, just think of different strategies, right? And that's been beneficial for us. And as part of that, you can redefine progress, okay? For right now, in terms of us, we try to really take it on a very micro level. So, instead of thinking about the full budget and what we're going for, it's like, okay, let's get to this number. Let's get to this number. And then can we get to this number? And part of it's also, too, what can you control? So, okay, let me outreach to 200 people, and fully customized sort of email, and that's hard in and of itself, but let's get that done. Okay, we did that. Now, what are things we can control, and how can we kind of continue going it? And the reason I mentioned Brene Brown at the beginning, because it really is a numbers game, right? One of the things I think about, Chris Stuckman, who's a YouTube movie reviewer for a number of years, very successful guy. He's amassed over 2 million subscribers on YouTube. I mean, that's success, right? Well, he's at heart a filmmaker, and so eventually he wanted to make his first movie. And so he leveraged his 2 million subscribers to crowdfund a movie. Now, he raised, I think around $2 million. Very, very successful crowdfund raise, for sure. I mean, that's huge. That's very, very impressive. And yet, the number of backers, I believe, is around 14,000. So 14,000 out of the 2 million people actually gave him money. So that's a very small percentage. And I say that encouragingly because it is a numbers game in terms of all of this. You just have to continue doing outreach and stuff like that. And when the going gets tough, that emotional stamina that I keep alluding to, really think about, okay, what is it that drove you to make this thing? Why are you doing this? Right? Quite literally, what is your why? Go back to that. Because that's the motivation that has to kind of keep you going first and foremost. And that's why, in the end, no matter what your creative form is, whether it's music, whether it's comedy, it doesn't matter. You kind of have to do it for yourself. You have to create art that you would love to see, because if you're just doing it for other people, it's never going to fill your soul to sustain itself. I talked about this with the idea that it's a mental battle of self-worth, but remember, separate rejection from identity. And let's be honest, a lot of the gatekeepers, the so-called gatekeepers, they're just trying to get through their day, no different than any of us, and not lose their job. And, they come from a very fearful place at the end of the day. They want to take certain risks, but it's hard. In fact, the TV show by Seth Rogen called The Studio has a very specific version of this, where Seth Rogen plays a movie studio executive, right? He's the head of the studio, and you would think he has the free reign to make all decisions of which movies get greenlit and blah, blah, blah. And at his heart, he's a cinephile who just wants to make good art. And yet, that is at odds with what is required of the job, ironically. And so that's a good viewpoint into why you should not take things very personally. I would encourage you to check out that movie, because or TV series, there's a lot to just take away from that, And lastly, in terms of the long game, because it is a long game, just visualize the endurance. And how I also, for me, at least, get through it is I'm a big advocate. I think in order to just be a good artist in general, you kind of have to be in shape, right? Like maintain, I think health, just in general, as human beings, like we need it, right? But working out and things of that nature, I think is beneficial. And a lot of the mental and physical stuff that I'm talking about as far as endurance, you apply that you can take those lessons from going to the gym and stuff like that, and it helps in terms of your art. It does for me. For me as a filmmaker, certainly when I go into a film production, right, those are very grueling days, can be, oftentimes very consecutive, right? And so if you're in good shape, that's going to help you, as opposed to if you're not ready for that sort of endurance. And in this particular case, like the mental endurance it takes to get through a very hard workout is akin to what's required as far as this. So those are some of the ways that I approach getting through these moments where I feel like I'm stalled. It certainly doesn't help that I'm an impatient person to begin with. I like to move at the speed of thought. Other people have just a more natural ability for patience. But if you don't develop these tactics, both mental as well as otherwise, it's going to be hard. It's going to drive you insane. But the good news, in a sort of odd, twisted way, is that every artist goes through this. Now, not every artist ultimately gets through to the other side necessarily. Like, it is crazy to think about all the artists that never saw, quote unquote, success until they passed, right? They're no longer with us. But that's why the ultimate message is, you got to really, whatever you're doing, you have to do it for yourself, first and foremost. Otherwise, you're kind of screwed. So I hope this has been eye-opening. I know it's not the most inspirational, grandly sort of episode, but I think there's a aspect to it where we all have to be honest with ourselves and just have this level of expectation of how we can navigate both artistic lives and life in general. And by knowing that, we can maybe get through it, right? There's kind of this notion that if you're a farmer, and, in the old days, they say, I forget the exact term, but let's say you're having to carry buckets of water, right? Obviously, it's a hard task. Well, it's only going to be made harder if you keep thinking it's harder, right? Like, if you keep focusing on, this sucks, this is hard, that's certainly not going to make it easier. And the encapsulation of what I'm talking about here, if we know that, we can, carry the buckets of water and not focus on how hard it is. So, thank you for taking time to tune in. As always, I truly do appreciate you. If you want to sort of explore this idea more, certainly in the written form, I post on my Substack, and that's just a different angle of these sort of episodes that I talk about. Also, on my Patreon page, if you want to support what I'm doing and also kind of get the various tools that I use, right? Those are available to you there, patreon.com/Phil Svitek. And I also do a monthly coaching, so that's a way to, get more direct interaction with me. So, I try to provide as much as I can. I would encourage you to comment down below. Let me know your thoughts and feelings and, experiences with this sort of a notion. Anyway, thank you for taking time to tune in. Truly appreciate it. See you